If not for Barbie, I would have easily said this is the most anticipated film of the year, but for me personally, it still was. We're talking about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, the biopic detailing the life of the American physicist and the so-called father of the atomic bomb. We start with Oppenheimer studying in Cambridge while his anxiety starts to overwhelm him. After meeting Niels Bohr, he decides to continue his studies in Germany before returning to the US to become a professor at UC Berkeley. Here he starts researching nuclear fission, which eventually becomes the basis for the Manhattan Project, or the overall experiment focused on the development of the atomic bomb. Throughout all of this, the film goes through Oppenheimer's romantic life, as well as his marriage to Kitty, an ex-communist, and his illicit relationship with communist Jean Tatlock. And on top of that, the film is guided by a 1954 hearing where Oppenheimer's government clearance is being questioned because of his communist ties, which is important because if his clearance is revoked, he loses pretty much any say he has on nuclear policy right at the start of the Cold War. The way this story is told intertwining between timelines is nothing new for Nolan, but if you aren't familiar with his films, this will give you a pretty good idea.
Best way to draw it is, as I have, that's basically the end of the movie. This stuff is the black and white stuff. This is colour, as it's running backwards, as a series of jumps. And what we do is we cut between the two the whole through. See here, see there, see there, see there, see there, see there, and they meet towards the end of the film.
The multiple plot lines along with the 3-hour runtime might be a little daunting, but I truly think this film is one of, if not the best paced film I've ever seen. While most feature-length films have ups and downs in terms of the speed of action, Oppenheimer goes up quickly and never comes down. And I know a lot of people thought the last hour was really slow, but to those people I say, no. It was awesome watching the film's loaded cast just go off. The other controversial point was Nolan's depiction of the Bhagavad Gita, and specifically its appearance during an R-rated sex scene. If you don't already know, Oppenheimer was reading the Gita after learning Sanskrit and said it was huge in shaping his overall philosophy of life. He later quoted it in this 1965 interview.
Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
But many Hindu viewers saw this as a degradation of the Gita and felt it was disrespectful to the book and its religious significance. But, and maybe no one will agree with this, I thought it was actually an exceptional use of foreshadowing in the film, which tied directly into the Trinity test and the first explosion of the atomic bomb. Without giving any spoilers, I felt that Oppenheimer's connection with the Gita is not portrayed alongside the presence of sex in his life, but rather with the presence of death. And no one dies during the sex scene, that's not what I meant. There are other controversies about this scene in other parts of the film, including giving Florence Pugh a black dress so the film could be played in certain countries, but we could spend all day on all that, so I'm just gonna move on. One of the other big topics of conversation is the Oscars, and I could also go on for a while here, so I'll summarize, but I'll preface it by saying there's a lot of great films that are set to come out later this year, so I'm sure it'll depend on what else we see. But as of now, I feel that Oppenheimer deserves at least a consideration for a nomination for these categories. And yeah, that's 12 nominations, but if Titanic can get 14, I don't think this is too outlandish. So with all that in mind, I wanted to give this film a 10 out of 10, but I think it's significantly better than the other 10s we've had, so I'm going to give it an 11, which is now the highest rated film we've had all time in this series. And everyone is going to fire back at me saying Barbie has higher box office numbers. It should. It has a much wider target audience and the song of the year.
Is it my destiny to live and die?